Hello guys, welcome back to another video on the philosophical or logic series. I am back. I have been recently volunteering at a library, so I've been busy there and then, but every time I get off, I always, read a little bit of books in my meantime. And I work on these videos, so stay tuned. I will be starting school soon. But I hope that doesn't hold me back because I will be posting, that's for sure. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Thank you for supporting me throughout these, I think, 7 months or 6 months now. I really appreciate the support. And I hope that, one day I'd be able to inspire more people to come learn philosophy and pursue it as a career properly. Not just for money, but for philosophy's own sake and value. So, yeah, let's get started into this video. Today we're going to be covering the types of demonstrations. Now, in my previous videos, I've covered categorical syllogisms, right? And I covered hypothetical syllogisms, but we're going to be exploring the species of syllogisms, basically, or demonstrations. So there's three types, really. But yes, most of this video, as I've said for this whole series, is I'm going to be using Coppens' brief textbook on mental philosophy and logic, but I've also added some supplemental stuff just in case. That is some further distinctions that he does not talk about in his book that I've noticed. Um, yeah, so, but I'll just let you know what stuff was in his book and what stuff was not. So let's get started. Okay, so first of all, this is in Coppens' books right here. This is where I got it from. So, obviously there are different species of demonstrative arguments, including one, a enthymeme. So, we call a syllogism an enthymeme when it's missing a assumption or proposition or premise, whether it be a major or minor premise. It basically has one premise implied as, for example, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. For example, this is missing its minor premise. The missing minor premise is Socrates is a man. Thus, if you take it the other way around, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, this is missing the major premise, that is, all men are mortal. And note that the ability to expose such hidden premises is going to be a very important skill in logic. Why? Because most of the time when you get arguments, they're probably usually in enthymemes. So how do you criticize an enthymeme? So it's pretty simple. All you have to do is expose the hidden premise, then use the ordinary rules of syllogisms, which are the 8 rules. If you watch my previous video, I covered all of those. But also, okay, this is the stuff that I added. This is more supplemental. This is not found in Coppens' books, but there are different types of orders of enthymemes. So there's a first order enthymeme, a second order enthymeme, and a third order. The first order is where the major premise is missing. The second order is where the minor is missing, as I've shown in the previous examples. And the third order is where the conclusion is missing. And that's basically it. The next species of demonstration is called sorieties, sometimes known as polysyllogisms. So as the name implies, it's a literal chain of connected syllogisms. It can also be defined as two or more categorical syllogisms where the intermediate conclusions have been omitted. It is an argument. Oh, and by the way, what I mean by the intermediate conclusions have been omitted, I will show you in the next examples that I wrote down and how to break down sorieties. So it'll be in the later slide though. But basically, sorieties is an argument that has more than 3 propositions where the predicate of the first subject becomes the subject of the second, and so on until the conclusion connects the subject of the first premise or first proposition with the predicate of the last premise or proposition. That is, for example, all A is B, man is accountable, whoever is accountable is free, that is, all B is C. 3, whoever is free is intelligent, all C is D. Whoever is intelligent cannot be mere matter, no D is P. 5, therefore man cannot be mere matter, that is, no A is P. Now, if you want to criticize or evaluate sorieties, you first break it down into connected syllogisms. If a sorieties cannot be broken down into valid syllogisms, then it implies that it is invalid. But generally, there are two rules for sororities, and this is the two rules again that I put in as supplemental details that are not found in Coppens' textbook on mental logic, or I mean logic or mental philosophy. So the rules are: Rule 1 is that no premise can be particular except the premise containing the subject of the conclusion. And Rule 2 is no premise may be negative except the premise containing the predicate of the conclusion. Okay, moving on. Again, as I've said, these are more supplemental stuff. This was not in Coppens' book. But there are two species of sororities, namely Aristotelian and Goclenian. Now, Coppens is using the Aristotelian sororities in the book. And so basically, the one that Coppens is using is where the predicate of prior premises becomes subject of a further premise, while the Goclenian sororities is where the subject of prior premises becomes the predicate of a further premise. So it's literally just switched around. And so the examples of Aristotelian sororities, or the sororities that Coppens mentions, is like this, where you can break them down. So if you go back really, I kind of skipped it, but if you go back to this syllogism right here, man is accountable, that is all A is B. Whoever is accountable is free, all B is C. Whoever is free is intelligent, that is all C is D. Whoever is intelligent cannot be mere matter, no D is P. Therefore, man cannot be mere matter. But yes, and so that is the syllogism I broke down here. For example, it goes like this: Whoever is accountable is free, that is all B is C. Man is accountable, all A is B. That is a first figure syllogism, namely Barbara. First figure is the most valid. Therefore, man is free. And the conclusion, right, that therefore man is free, is the intermediate conclusions that are omitted. That's why you don't see therefore man is free in this original sororities. It's because the intermediate conclusions are not there. But when you break it down, you're able to get that intermediate conclusion, that therefore man is free. And then I took that intermediate conclusion, and then I used another premise from the sororities. That is, whoever is free is intelligent, but man is free, therefore man is intelligent. And then whoever is intelligent cannot be mere matter, that is no D is P. But man is intelligent, that is all A is D, therefore man cannot be mere matter. And because this can be validly broken down into valid syllogisms, we would say that the sororities itself is valid and it has the same conclusion. That is why here in the original sororities, no A is P is the conclusion. Thus, another example I wrote out, this is another sororities. For example, all A is B, all B is C, all C is D, all D is E, all E is F, therefore all A is F. And then I broke it down into all B is C, all A is B, therefore all A is C. And then another is all C is D, all A is C, therefore all A is D. But if all D is E, that is from the sororities premises, and all A is D, therefore all A is E. And then lastly, if all E is F and all A is E, then therefore all A is F, which is the same conclusion from the sororities that I wrote down. And that is how you would step by step break down these sororities into many syllogisms. Now note that this video obviously presupposes that you have some knowledge on the figures of syllogisms, because in order for you to break it down, you need to know figure. Right? It's very important. You can also do an indirect first figure, which is basically the fourth figure, but you have to know what the figures are. Remember, figure of a syllogism is the placement of the middle term in respect of the major and minor premise. So the reason why I'm saying that the reason why you see the middle term, that is the term that appears in both premises, structured like this in each syllogism I broke down, is because I wanted to make it a first figure. A first figure has the middle term, first subject, then predicate. And that's basically why. But let's test a invalid sororities which violates Rule 1. Now, if you remember Rule 1 is that no premise can be particular except the premise containing the subject of the conclusion. Thus, the invalid sororities goes like this: all A is B, some B is C, all C is D, all D is E, therefore all A is E. But if we break it down, let's start that all A is B, some B is C, therefore we can only conclude therefore some C is A. But if all C is D and some C is A, therefore we can conclude that therefore some A is D. But if all D is E and some A is D, some A is E. This is not the conclusion we got from the sorieties, or it cannot be validly broken down into the desired conclusion. That is, all A is E. And so therefore, some A is E is not the same as all A is E. So this violates rule 1, therefore making it an invalid sorieties. But if we change premise 2, then it becomes valid again. As I've said, that premise 2 becomes all B is C, then it breaks down logically. And also note, if you start with a particular premise, your conclusion must also be particular. Why? Remember in formal logic or categorical logic, or that the conclusion, that is one of the 8 rules of the syllogisms, that the conclusion must be less primary or less in strength than the premises. That is why if one of your conclusions is negative, so is your conclusion. And if one of your premises is particular, so is your conclusion again. Thus, if it goes from some A is B, and all B is C, all C is D, and all D is E, therefore I conclude therefore some A is E. Alright, the next species of demonstration or argument is the dilemma. And you might have already heard of this. The dilemma is an argument which offers your opponent the choice between 2 or more choices, but each choice leads to a conclusion that goes against that opponent's position. Basically meaning each option is unplausible for him, or is against his position. So he's really forced. That's why it's called a dilemma. And the alternatives are called the horns of the dilemma, which you might have heard this in philosophy since it's a common species of argumentation. And Coppens gives us the example of a dilemma. Either Protestantism or Catholicism is right. If Protestantism is right, everyone must be guided by his own judgment in religious matters, and you should not prevent me from judging for myself. But if Catholicity or Catholicism is right, you ought not only not to prevent me, but even to follow my example. Thus, the form of this dilemma looks like this: either A or B is true. But if B is true, then C is true. But if A is true, then C is also true. Thus, for a dilemma to be conclusive, it must allow no escape from the options or horns in each conclusion. Thus, if an opponent escapes, we would say that they escaped the horns. And each conclusion has to follow logically and necessarily. That is, the consequent must follow the antecedent necessarily. And the dilemma mentioned above does not work or would not work on somebody who is, let's say, a pagan, right? So it has to be respective to someone's position. So that's why the dilemma above doesn't work on somebody who is, let's say, a pagan who believes in multiple gods, because they would deny the major, since a pagan does not believe in Catholicism or Protestantism. Now, by each conclusion following logically strictly, it means there is no reversing or retorting. There are forms of the dilemmas, as I've said. This is also one of the supplemental info that I put in that's not in Coppens' book, but here it is. Sorry, I just had to drink some water. So it goes, the first form of a dilemma is the simple constructive dilemma. And it goes like this: if A is true, then C is true. If B is true, then C is also true. But therefore, either A or B is true. Therefore, C. Ergo here just also means therefore, by the way. And the second form is the complex constructive dilemma. If A is true, then C is true. If B is true, then D is true. But either A or B is true. Therefore, either C or D is true. And then the simple destructive dilemma goes like this: if A is true, then C and D are true. But either not C or not D, therefore not A. Because remember, if it takes the form if P then Q, if you deny the consequent, you likewise have to deny the antecedent. Thus, for 4, the complex destructive dilemma is if A then C, if B then D. but either not C or not D, or I spelled not wrong here, but this is or not D, ergo, therefore, either not A or not B. Alright, and so we have the next species of argumentation, or demonstration, my bad, that is the epikyrema. You might have heard of this before. And an epikyrema is where the proof of the premises, or one of them, are in the syllogism, or premises, although the epikyrema is deemed more rhetorical rather than a demonstration. But here's an example. Democracy should reflect the will of the people, but widespread misinformation distorts public opinion, making true reflection impossible. Therefore, misinformation undermines democracy. And this is probably the most common form of demonstration out there. You hear a lot. But there are also types of epikyrema. That is a simple and complex. First of all, a simple epikyrema has a proof attached to one of its premises. And two, a complex epikyrema is a syllogism which has proofs attached to its two premises. Alright, and that's basically it for the epikyrema. Now let's look at induction. And this is a very important thing to know about, because it's basically the ground or foundation for every natural or physical science. It follows a process that is the reverse of the syllogism. Because a syllogism, or a deduction, is arguing from the universal to the particular, while induction argues from the particular to the universal. Notably, demonstration or deduction has the conclusion implicitly contained in the premises, while induction does not. And induction is also said to be reasoning, where we conclude that what is true of some observed cases is true of the whole class. Induction can take two forms. It can either be a complete induction or an incomplete induction, depending on whether all cases are examined. So, first of all, complete induction examines every member of a class and then states a universal conclusion. For example, if we observed or examined every zone of the earth that can support human life, or all zones of the earth can support human life, and it's based on the principle or syllogism, if something is true of every individual in a class, therefore it is true of the entire class. And the incomplete induction, incomplete induction by contrast, is very much used in common science today, and it draws general conclusions from a sufficient number of varied cases, but not all, and it aims to show that a property arises from the nature of the objects, not from chance. While doubt remains, certainty isn't possible but when doubt is excluded. The reasoning is conclusive. It follows that if a property comes from the nature of an object, it must always be present. Experiments show this is the case, therefore it always accompanies the object. For example, if heavy bodies in all tested conditions fall when unsupported, so we conclude this is a natural law. Thus Coppens also beautifully puts it, the only danger is that scientists, in their eagerness to formulate general laws, will not always examine a sufficient variety of cases to exclude all doubt as to the real cause of the phenomena observed. And also, because Coppens is a Catholic, he is against the concept of evolution, which was going through the time of his, philosophical ages. So yeah. Furthermore, we have to pinpoint that a conclusion is said to be valid if and only if it is contained in the premises from which it is derived. So an assertion being true in 99 cases doesn't guarantee that it will hold in the 100th, as that case isn't observed. And I'm pretty sure David Hume made this point too. Sorry, I was just drinking water, but David Hume also made this point too, because how can we go from the observed to the unobserved? And so that's interesting. Now, incomplete induction alone cannot provide scientific proof without a syllogism, but we do have scientific proofs for many things. Thus, materialists and positivists who accept only matter, and by the way, materialists and positives are against Coppens' position. Coppens is arguing against them. He says they accept only matter and sensory experience, and are mistaken in claiming that the mind knows only through observed and generalized facts. They deny the existence of universal truths beyond induction, and some even argue that we can't even know a circle must be round, but only that it appears so on Earth. But the statement a circle is round is self-evident because round, the predicate is contained in the essence of the subject. And that's one of the first ways that a statement can be self-evident according to Thomas Aquinas. And it's not based on observation or induction, right? I don't have to literally go out to observe a circle is round to know that a circle is round, right? It's self-evident within the concept itself. Although this is a priori, obviously we do learn from experience first. We had to experience what a circle looks like before to even form the concept of that circle. But the fact that the circle is round is not justified, or its truth does not come from experience, but rather it is self-evident in itself. But we only come to know it from experience, if that makes sense. That is Coppens' position, by the way. And a system is also said to be false if it leads to logically absurd consequences, which the materialists and positivists have in this case. And that's basically it for this video, my friends. Thank you so much for watching. The next video, I think I'll cover probable reasoning or indirect reasoning. But yeah, that'll be a short video. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and support the channel, and I'll see you in another time.